A new report by Catalyst finds that when it comes to tech-intensive industries, women aren't necessarily welcome, with many choosing not to enter the science, technology, engineering, or math fields, and more likely to leave once they join. Joining us now for more on the tech gender gap, Alex Johnston. She is Executive Director at Catalyst Canada. Sadia Musavar, founder and CEO of Tech Girls Canada. Jennifer Evans, president of BBB Newsnetwork.com, just launched today. And Jamie Leverton, Vice President of North America Carriers at BlackBerry. And it's good to have you four around this table here for a long overdue discussion. Alex, I want to start with you because we want to go through some of the findings of your report. And I want to start with just telling us, what's Catalyst?
Catalyst is a global nonprofit based out of New York. I run the Canada operations. We typically work with large businesses, Fortune 500, FP 500 companies, to help them develop their talent well, with a specific focus on helping them understand gender barriers in the workplace.
Here are some of the numbers that we're going to consider that you have put together. So if we can, Sheldon, let's bring these up. Business roles in tech-intensive industries. 53% of women left to take a position in another industry compared to just 31% of men who do that. 55% of women were more likely to start in entry-level positions and be paid less compared to 39% of men. This is assuming the same education level. High potential men, so-called, and women were less likely to have a female supervisor than those in other industries. Tech-intensive industries, 15%, other industries, 21%. 55% of women report unclear evaluation criteria. It's only 42% in other industries. 84% of women aspire to senior executive/CEO levels compared to 97% of men. Let's start to go through this. Why did you want to do this report in the first place?
STEM is such an important sector. This is part of a long-term study that we're doing tracking MBA grads globally. So we're following about 10,000 men and women from schools around the world. This is a subset of that. We've been doing it since 2008. We wanted to focus on STEM because
STEM, remind everybody.
Science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Everybody knows that there are challenges getting women in STEM, keeping women in STEM. The difference with this, which I really like, is it's focused on MBA grads. So it's looking at whether women with a STEM background, men and women, but people with a STEM background, once they go and do their MBA, are choosing to return to STEM as a sector. And once they do choose, if they choose to return to STEM as a sector, whether they're staying, what we found is that once women have an MBA, they're typically not going back to STEM as a sector to pursue their career. And if they are going back, the majority of them, after a certain period of time, are leaving. That is very challenging. That has significant red flags for the sector. And that is a huge disadvantage to companies in that sector not leveraging the full complement of talent in Canada. And it's a disadvantage for women because these are such desirable, often jobs and companies to work in.
How did you come to these numbers?
We basically surveyed about 6,000 MBA grads and broke down, patterns in terms of where people were going, whether they were staying, and then we really wanted to drill down and look at the reasons why they were leaving. You tabled some of that, but the three big things that we found women were saying is having very few or no female role models and mentors in the workplace is really tough. Unclear evaluation criteria, so it's not clear to them how they advance. I think what we're getting at there is even if you are saying, here are the three things we want to see from you, unwritten rules are often as important as written rules in terms of advancement, and that's probably something that's playing out very significantly here. And then feeling like an outsider. Typically when you look at group settings, people want to feel both included and unique, and so they want to be part of the group and they also want to be sort of themselves. What women are telling us in this research is that they do feel like outsiders, and walking into a room and never feeling like you belong is a tough experience.
I'm going to get the rest of the group in 1 second. One more question. Is there any doubt in your mind but that this sector in particular is more sexist than many others?
Certainly what this is telling us is it's a very, very challenging culture. So we see these patterns globally. We are seeing them in a much more pronounced way in the sector, and that is a big red flag for leaders in the sector that they have an opportunity to address.
Okay, let's go around the table here. Jennifer, tell us about your website, which launched today. What is that?
BBB News Network is a site for organizations and professionals who are in the B2B space. One of the things that we've heard over the past few years, there's been a significant investment in something called content marketing. And companies that invest in content marketing, which do tend to be technology companies by and large, are finding difficulty actually getting visibility around these assets. So we're going to be covering the space, but also making a connection through to actual lead generation for these companies. It's a bit of an experiment, so we're very interested to see how it goes.
And what do you actually do there?
I'm the president.
You're the president,
and
which means
co-founder.
you're in charge of the whole damn thing.
That is correct.
How much money have you spent so far?
Actually, we're doing this one as leanly as possible. So we've invested in a domain name, and we've got an existing team that's basically deployed on this, and a couple of sponsors on board, so it's going well so far.
Okay, let's find out other people's experiences here. Jamie, what do you do?
I'm currently the Vice President of North American Carriers at BlackBerry. I recently joined BlackBerry in July, having spent 5 previous years at Bell and 10 years before that at IBM after graduating with my MBA. So I'm an MBA grad that's been in tech for the past 15 years.
And how are you enjoying it?
I really enjoy it. It's very challenging, but
Challenging means what?
it's challenging to be the minority in most rooms that I'm in.
So you don't mean challenging because it's BlackBerry, you mean challenging because it's...
Tech is challenging as a woman, for sure. I would say I didn't notice it as much when I first graduated from my MBA and started at IBM. There was more of a gender mix. It became more prevalent as I advanced in my career, and the further up the ladder I moved, the more I realized I was a lonelier voice as a woman at the table. And actually what I found as I became aware of that is it made me want to use that voice more often, more loudly, and I became much more passionate about gender issues in technology. And it's something that I continue to be very passionate about today. I think that tech is the future. I have 2 daughters, they're 4 and 6. And I think it's one of the areas that they'll most likely go into when they're career ready. And I want them to go into an industry that they can love and that they can feel welcome in.
When you go to senior staff meetings where, let's say, the president, all the VPs, all the EVPs and so on are there, how many are men and how many are women?
I would say over the course of all 3 companies, it's between 10 and 15% of any room would be women at the senior level.
Okay, Sadia, tell us about Tech Girls Canada. What is that?
So Tech Girls Canada is a direct result of me not finding enough women that I could network with when I crossed over into technology from finance. And that was shocking for me for the first year, because out of the 114 or so startups that I worked with in a technology and innovation center, maybe 2 had women. And I couldn't believe it, that statistically that it was even possible.
2 had just women at all?
At all in the founding teams, because you're working with startups. That just felt wrong, that you almost cross into this warp zone as soon as you enter tech. So Tech Girls Canada is gearing to change that conversation by bridging the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, to form partnerships that actually move the needle versus just generate reports that get shelved in the private sector and nothing really happens, because there is a divide between the 2 sectors where each feels the other doesn't understand how their world operates.
When you do what you do and you present these findings, for example, to male-dominated companies in your sector, do they acknowledge this is a thing?
I think it's becoming better now in terms of acknowledgement, but there is still this sense of, is this really a problem that we want to tackle? And I think that's primarily because a lot of what's come out in the past has been based on the social justice aspect of it, which is very, very important in terms of fairness. But there is a whole economic side to this argument that doesn't get enough airtime, I think. And that needs to be tabled far more often, far more clearly.
What's the economic argument you're referring to?
So the economic argument is having women and diversity. So not just women, but people of color, people of varying abilities, genderqueer people. Everyone at the table is good for business. It's good for your bottom line. It affects your return on equity. It's good for, shareholder perception of what your company does.
And in an environment where we still have a lot of people looking for jobs, there are a tremendous number of jobs in the tech sector that go unfilled every year. And by upgrading skills and by becoming a part of that environment, you actually can increase your earning potential significantly.
Let me make the devil's advocate argument, though, here, Alex, which is if more women wanted to go into tech, they could. And the reason that it's 85-15, to use Jamie's numbers over here, is that overwhelmingly men want to do this and overwhelmingly women don't want to do this. That's the argument. True or false?
Totally false. So what I love about the research, and again, the research is just evidence, and then you turn the evidence into sort of practical strategies and really try to drive a practical conversation. The evidence is telling us there are very specific reasons why women are not choosing it and very specific reasons why women are not staying. Any good business leader who thinks about talent, and so many of them do, looks at this and says, oh, I want to make sure that I'm looking at 100% of my talent pool and I'm getting the best and the brightest. And then once I have them.
It is not a question of women don't want to go into this field. It is a question of once they're in, it's not welcoming.
Women and men both want good jobs. Women and men both want good careers. These are the careers of the future. We're going to need a whole range of people going into different fields. But for women not to be choosing this and for women not to be staying is really tough. What this is telling us is there are very specific barriers and obstacles that business leaders can actually address. So to me, this is positive.
Can I get more specific here? Namely, if we're going to understand this, we need to understand examples of what kind of sexism women run into in a field that is overwhelmingly dominated by men. So, anybody got an example here they want to share?
We could probably be here all day if I just went through
Really?
all of them. But
okay, give us an example.
a good example would be in my world, which is technology entrepreneurship, startups. Women need to lead their teams and raise funds. And one of the biggest barriers that they run into, once they've gone past the notion of, I have an idea and I want to build this, is raise funding. And they would often very clearly hear terms like, if you only wore a shorter skirt, this would work for you. I know people personally who've gotten these comments
I don't get that.
out in the open.
What does that mean?
That just means that you need to present yourself a certain way. Or it could just mean as blatantly sexist as it sounds. I don't think it's complicated. I think what it comes down to is, what do we tolerate? There's a huge bystander culture in technology where everybody sees these things happening. So there is the passive side of, just bias and discrimination. But there's a very pronounced active side where there is harassment. And we don't have enough buy-in from the top down to say, we will not tolerate this. There isn't enough of a culture of accountability where you can call somebody out. Just because there's a policy that HR has somewhere in a manual doesn't mean that it gets implemented in the trenches like that.
I want to give you one more concrete one. We touch on it here, but it's the different compensation right out of the gate. So that to me is a significant issue. What we found in the global study, and we don't draw it out here, is when we've looked at file allocation, we asked men and women a couple of years ago, are you getting hot job experience, so mission critical files to the organization? And they both said, yes, we are. And this is thousands and thousands of individuals. And then we actually drilled down and looked at the files, and we found that on average, men's projects were twice that of their female counterparts in terms of monetary value, 3 times the number of direct reports, significantly more exposure to senior executives. The file allocation, the project allocation, has significant things in people deciding who they trust, how they trust them. You're looking at equally capable, skilled, competent people, and right out of the gate, you're putting them on different career paths. That's not sexism in the way we define it, and people deliberately sort of doing and saying things. It's part of who we are. It's what we bring to the table. What we're trying to do is say to business leaders making these decisions, look at your decision making and make sure that you are making these decisions in a way that allows men and women to advance their careers and fulfill their potential, achieve their potential, and contribute fully to your organization.
I think much the same way you would define leadership. I think that needs revisiting. All the qualities that we associate with leadership today are a negative for women. So women would be, in their performance appraisals, assessed as abrasive, whereas the very same assessment for a male counterpart
strong or tough or whatever. But that's cross-sectoral. I mean, we hear those kinds of comments in everything. Is there anything particular at tech that makes it more sexist than other sectors?
If you have a vast majority of the decision makers in technology be male, and not just male, but white male, I think you look for people like yourselves, and they surround themselves. One of the things that I think does not get talked about often is tech as we know it is relatively young, even though we factor in oil and gas, et cetera. You're looking at companies like Facebook, like BlackBerry, their tenure is under 15 years. When you're building a company that goes from a garage to multi-billion-dollar IPO in a span of a decade, you're not really putting a lot of thought in how you're hiring people, who are you surrounding yourselves with, what are you funding. You're actually checking in with a lot of gut feel, which is something that data shows is biased. We were just wired like that.
It's typically that you're hiring people that look like you, right? That are familiar, that agree with you, that have the same kinds of opinions. It's the opinion bias like anything else, unfortunately. And I think there's also a counterpart to that, which is that women can be termed as abrasive. I had an experience where I was in a management meeting and I was very passionate about what I was talking about, too passionate. I burst into tears in the middle of the meeting, and I pretty much had to leave the company thereafter because I was the only woman on the management team. I was the youngest person. And after that, all of the men that I was working with looked at me differently. Like they looked at me.
They didn't take you as seriously.
They didn't take me as seriously. They looked at me as emotional, and my heart was in the right place. I certainly had the passion. It just came out in the wrong way, and it completely killed my career at that.
It's strange because there's been no president of the United States that has cried more in public than George W. Bush, and yet everybody thinks of him as a big, tough
strong
macho,
guy.
Strong Texas swagger.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a terrible double standard. How about you in terms of sexism? Now maybe. I don't know if you want to say anything going on at BlackBerry, but how about in general, in your experience?
A couple of things. Early in my career, I had a mentor who was very, very good to me, and he's still a very close friend to this day. And as I was starting to move up the ranks, he pulled me aside and said, I know you have strong aspirations. You're very, very competent. But if you want to take on increasingly senior roles, you're going to have to be less nice. People look at you and they think you're nice, they think you're friendly. He said, and you are, but you can't lead with that. You're not going to be taken seriously if people think you're nice or you're too friendly.
What did you think of that advice?
I didn't like it in the beginning, for sure. And I really struggled with it because I didn't want to be somebody different at work. But what he was really trying to tell me was I had to show up differently in the beginning. And it's advice that...
Did he mean be less female? Is that what you interpreted it to mean?
I don't think he's ever counseled any male to be less nice.
Gotcha.
I think particularly at the time I was very young, and being perceived as bubbly or friendly or nice wasn't a way to get ahead in that environment. I tell that story a lot with girls that I mentor now because I want them to be their whole selves at work. But there's a way to be your whole self and be taken seriously. And I think you really have to look to find that balance. But as I say, I don't think men are coached based on their level of niceness.
But you like this guy, right? And you
Very
think,
much.
And so he's
Very
not
much.
being sort of purposefully
Absolutely not.
jerkish.
He was absolutely doing me a favor. He at least had the courage to tell me what other people were probably thinking but wouldn't say. He was able to say it.
And let's face it, as women, we are generally brought up to be nice. We keep the peace. I'm generalizing here madly, but we tend to be the people who get things done, who smooth the waters over. And so it's hard for us, I think, at a certain point to leap out of that and say, I need to be a completely different way in order to get things done. That's not necessarily a natural progression for a lot of us.
Have any of you, or maybe all of you, at some point in your careers experienced some guy telling you, that's not how you should dress in this particular company or on this particular project, with advice that obviously he would never give to a fellow man? Does that happen?
I think I've received great advice and terrible advice. I think the older you get, you're better able to distinguish between bad advice and relevant advice. I think the benefit in having a diverse set of role models is that you can see yourself in different people. When you can't see yourself in anyone, I always describe myself as a feisty, passionate hand talker, and I do cry, and I get intensely wound up about things, and there are tears in my eyes, my hands are going. I'm sure that 25 years ago that would have been more jarring than it is today, because I see some women like that. The women I typically admire are very much themselves. And that doesn't mean they started out at 22 exactly the way they are at 52. But someone like Katie Taylor always says, when you have a male mentor or role model or sponsor, meet the wife. And if he is, married to a strong, grounded woman, he's not going to have any difficulty with you being strong and a variety of different things. But
This is the first female bank chair in Canadian history you're referring to.
For RBC, and I think that at the end of the day, being able to distinguish between advice that is helpful and relevant and advice that is a stereotype that is not relevant to who you are is important, and it comes with time.
Let me ask the sort of next level question then, if I can, which is, and we go through this in politics all the time, where people frequently tell us women bring something different to the table in politics and you have to have it, and if you don't have it, society as a whole is going to lose out. Is it the same thing, Sadia, when it comes to the tech world? If you don't have whatever it is that makes women different from men there and present, we all lose out somehow?
I'm very wary of notions like that, primarily because they're set in a gender binary that's not applicable anymore. What I would say is that when you have diversity of gender and point of views around your table, you are less likely to make certain decisions that would be biased towards people who are different from you. So it's not just the fact that when you have women around the table, what they offer as input is what changes the game. It's the people who are around the table who are affected by the fact that they're not surrounded by a replica of themselves, and it's not an echo chamber. There are people who can offer different priorities and maybe be able to say, but have you thought about the implications of this at what the others might consider a minority? So I think it goes both ways. It's not just a very special something that women can bring, although there are a lot of perspectives that they would underscore.
I want to follow up with Jamie on that, because I wonder, when you're in those meetings, and let's pick on BlackBerry for a second here, where you're one of 15% of the people in the room who are female. Do the women in that room think that they are bringing something different to BlackBerry in terms of smarts, contribution, worldview, awareness of product, whatever it may be, that the men won't have because you're not men?
I wouldn't say it in terms as black and white as that. I would absolutely say, as for most tech companies, your consumers are 50% women. So if you don't have females at the table in all steps, the chance of you being able to best create products and create programs that address your marketplace are reduced. Because if you don't have 50% of women at the table, then you're not necessarily getting the perspective that goes to 50% of your shareholders, your consumers.
But no, listen, I don't know this, but you will, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong. I can't imagine any tech company's got 50% of the women in executive management positions.
Absolutely
and
not.
Yet 50% of their customers are women. So
who have 80% of the household spending power and are making most of those decisions.
So somehow these companies are doing well enough. I mean, there's people out there making billions of dollars in this field, even though women are not well represented in decision-making capacities. So 15%
that's the issue. So many different studies, including work that we've done, show that 30% is a critical mass. So once you got 30% of anything in a room, any one group, the culture starts to change. So it's not that you won't have one woman around a table of 10 who's not completely comfortable speaking up, making her point, et cetera, but typically once you've got at least a critical mass of people of a sort of demographic, the culture starts to change. That's the tipping point. So I think that the 15% is the challenge, and I think building on that is the objective. Whether we get to 50-50 is not, living in a world of 50-50 is not realistic. I think that what we're saying here, what the conversation is having too few women is a real problem. I think that changing the dynamic around a table takes a critical mass. I don't think at this point people are talking in terms of 50-50. They're saying alarm bells are going off, because many of those companies might be doing well today, but the world changes at the speed of light. Making sure you've got the best talent for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years is the objective of most of these companies.
And the question really is, what happened? Because right up to 1984, women actually were dominating computer science. So you can see an almost absolutely precipitous drop-off. Love to know what happened in 1984, but the numbers just go down like this, and the male numbers go up.
that is interesting.
And
Anybody got a theory on that? What was magic about 1984?
The 80s, I mean, puffy shoulders, I have no idea, but
I think what we consider high tech right now was just starting off. I think that's what happened. A lot of technology shifted to software, which is what we see today. And we see today that no matter what sector you're in, whether you consider yourself within technology, you're at least peripheral to it, or you're using it. So, and that's fairly recent, as I mentioned. Very, very short time frame if you think about a sector and a development of culture and expectations and all of that. So maybe 1984 was the magic year where things kind of tipped up.
Again, I don't know anything about this stuff, so you guys are going to help me out here. But the guys who are superstars in this field are guys who are happy to sit alone in their basements and write code for 20 hours every day. Now, do women want to do that? I don't know.
There are definitely some women that
There
are
are some
sitting
women
in
who
their
will do
basement
that.
writing code. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Tech Girls has a campaign called Portraits of Strength. We ran it since March of this year. And if you look at the women featured there, they're primarily not your usual suspects, as you mentioned. They're very, very passionate about what they do. They're in gaming. There are digital activists who rewrite games to represent better what a protagonist should be, so that, you know, women aren't always getting rescued in games. And they can actually, you know, change that. And they're coders, and yes.
Well, in which case, what was your reaction to this whole Gamergate business where, you know, this woman who is trying to make these video games actually look more realistic and saner than the guys who programmed them in the first place are?
Right.
And she's had a whole heap of misery come down on her head as a result of that.
So the thing that I want to underscore that is, even though everyone knows about Anita Sarkeesian and what has happened with her with Gamergate, she's not the only one. This is actually very, very common, to the point where most of the women in gaming know about this. So now we have a hashtag and we have a name to talk about it. But it's not just in gaming. I think it exists in different versions in many places that are male dominant. And there is a shift that's happening, and that shift is not something that is looked upon favorably by the people who thought they ruled what I would call the programmer
look
culture.
at what happened to Kathy Sierra. I mean, that predates Gamergate. I don't know if you're
Tell
familiar
us,
with
what's the story?
Kathy. She's probably one of the most renowned usability, and she wrote a book called Creating Passionate Users, and came from a very technical background, and got targeted because she had some prominence by an online troll named Weave, who did something called doxing her. So he basically put her public information out so that people could find out where she lived, and she just withdrew from the internet immediately. And you know, it was a real loss to the community, because she's a really significant, powerful voice for women in technology, but also for users in the space. And she came back to Twitter for a little while, and then it happened again, and she's gone again. And that's, you know, that's one of the leaders in our community, and she doesn't feel safe enough to be able to have an online presence on an
This is
ongoing
different, though,
basis.
clearly from, you know, just women don't make up a high enough percentage of executive management positions
Very
and so on.
different.
This is all about, this is, you know, harassment, this is fear, this is threatening.
This is 4chan.
But that's the thing,
yes.
though. I think we can't pretend that the online rape and death threats do not have an effect on women wanting to be in technology.
Exactly.
We can't pretend that that doesn't matter.
So what's that about? This is men just simply wanting to have this sector be all male?
Yes, primarily that's, so what they're saying is it's changing and we don't like it. That's what it really boils down to. Because a lot of the things in Gamergate, which has now become a meme, that this is about ethics in games journalism, it's not. It's not about that, because it didn't start with this. And that's why I think reports like the one Catalyst has put out are really, really important, but they're one aspect of what we need to address. What I really want to say is, are we actually ready now to talk about the more active sorts of factors that affect women's desire to enter tech, to stay in it? A lot of people would tell you that tech has a pipeline problem, that there aren't
Pipeline
enough,
problem means?
meaning there aren't enough women entering tech. They're not going to take computer sciences, they're not coding. I don't think that's the problem. If you have a sector that's lucrative, that's a good choice in terms of a career, there is no reason why anybody would want out of it other than they're not welcome.
Can I put this chart up now? Because I think this is sort of amplifies on all of what we've been talking about here. This is the Pew Research organization, which looked at levels of online harassment or harassment, however you are pronouncing it, for men and women. And here we go. The darker line, the darker bar is male and the lighter one is female. And how about called offensive names? More men are doing it than are apparently women. Purposefully embarrassed, men lead. Physically threatened, more men doing it. Harassed for a sustained period, again, more men. But look at these last two. Stalked. More females are encountering this than males. And sexually harassed, more females encountering this than males. And as you look at those numbers, I don't know, Jennifer, what jumps out at you?
Well, there's two very different ways that the genders are responding to exactly what the issues are. I think that the activities of harassment and stalking are a lot more passive and a lot more insidious in many ways, because it's hard to deal with a nameless, faceless opponent. And that's something that can be really terrifying, especially when you talk about the doxing, which is the idea of releasing people's public information so that somebody can either email them or go to their home or take some kind of other action with that information.
Making public their private information, I think
Exactly.
is what you mean.
Yeah, publishing it on sites like 4chan or Reddit.
Does it go without saying that all of you at some point in your lives have faced this online? Yes, you all have.
I have no online presence whatsoever, so no, but in my life I
Is
have.
that right? Alex, you have no online presence?
Yes, that's true. I'm terrible.
Wait a second, you don't have a Facebook page?
I do not. I did not want to say that publicly today, but no, I do not.
You don't have a Twitter account?
This is becoming very humiliating. No.
You have an
Don't
email.
go on.
You have an
Yes, I do
email
have an
address.
Yes. The email, I have a BlackBerry. I still have a landline
She'll be glad
at
about
home.
that.
I'm very glad about that.
Yeah, she's glad about that.
And I can't say I have either, Steve, to be honest. I have a Facebook account, but a limited online profile outside of that.
And you do that on purpose?
I do that, yeah, on purpose. I'm a private person, and I haven't expanded my online presence for that reason outside of Facebook.
But I'm inferring here that it's not just that you haven't gotten around to it. You've made the decision
I've
not to
made the
do this
decision.
because you're not interested in all of the crap that comes associated with that.
At this point in time, I don't have the time to invest in everything that entails a broader online presence.
Sadia, how about you?
I'm very active online, and a lot of what I speak to comes from the community. So even if I've not personally experienced it for myself, I've witnessed it in real time in terms of what the community actually goes through. And one of the things to consider when anybody's looking at something like Gamergate is, sure, this is much more addressed to people who are involved in these communities. But even women who leave tech, the 53% who decide to go elsewhere, this isn't a split-second decision that they just wake up one day and say, oh, you know what, I don't feel like being in this sector anymore. It's years in the making. It's death by a million microaggressions that happens every day, and we don't talk about that because perhaps there are far too many to encounter, but we need to have those messy conversations right now, because if we just say that we're going to put in policies which are super critical, like equal pay and mentorship and sponsorship, all of that, remember, all policies are only as good as the people who are implementing them.
But Alex, do we say something as simple as, this problem will get solved when men behave better?
I think this problem will get solved when leaders take responsibility for what's actually going on. And I always say this is truly about all of us. The reason we focus so much of our attention on men is because they're in decision-making leadership roles disproportionately, especially in the sector. The reason I love the evidence is because it gives you something concrete. So we all gravitate towards anecdotes, but I asked so-and-so to take the promotion and she said no. But I really encouraged her to choose X and she said no. Those are anecdotal stories. They can be mildly informative. Once you actually have patterns, you can have a real conversation. And I think we are now at a place where we've got enough information, enough evidence, leaders can have a real conversation.
And it's not just about the workplace anymore. That's the thing that is, for the two of you who have probably very intelligently managed your online presences, it bleeds into everything else, right? Like, it is not just about work anymore. And when you see initiatives like We for She that Emma Watson has recently brought up, so that you have men supporting this, and the White Ribbon Campaign, where I was chair for a number of years, where the same kind of thing is happening, we do need both genders to address this. It's not going to get solved just by women alone, and certainly what we've seen on the internet during Gamergate and during some of the stuff that's happened in Canada over the past week, it's been heartening to see some of those responses actually occurring.
That was a very, very bland reference to something that has been on the front page for about a week now, every day for a week now, something that's been happening in Canada. Yeah,
it certainly does relate to what we're talking about.
I think you're right about that. What about just about a minute to go here? Women clearly are hip to this issue and the problems around it. Are men in your sector yet hip to this?
Absolutely. I think with respect to BlackBerry, we actually have a really strong representation. We've got 29% of our board members are women, and BlackBerry started to do some really creative things to address the problem. In many thanks to our leadership team. We actually have 10 women in universities right now in STEM programs on full scholarship with BlackBerry, four-year programs where they will graduate from STEM fields. They're paired with a mentor, so I mentor one of the students. They go to hackathons on behalf of BlackBerry. They're in all different fields within
Hackathons?
STEM. Hackathons.
What's that? What's a hackathon?
Right out of an online profile.
You bring a whole bunch of people together to solve a technology problem, like in a 24-hour period, and the winning team, or the group that creates the best solution, essentially wins the hackathon.
Sounded much more nefarious than what you just said, I got to say.
But the reality is we're trying to address the pipeline problem at BlackBerry of getting more women into the company, making sure that they have a relationship with a senior leader, so that we can slowly pull them up and change the demographics around the table, because it's recognized that it's critically important to do so.
Speaking of around the table, I want to thank the four women who've been around this table for joining us at TVO tonight. Alex Johnston and Jennifer Evans on the left-hand side of the table, Sadia Mosavar and Jamie Leverton on the right-hand side of the table. Good of you to share your views with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at TVO.org.